Welcome to the Voice of Retail for the week of November 18th, 2019. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. This podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. In this week's episode, I'm on the trade show floor of RCC's DTLQC conference in Montreal, talking with local retailers and retail industry players based in Quebec. First of all, serial retail innovator and now CEO of iStore, Joel Teitelbaum is my guest. Joel shares the details behind his rich retail background and reflects on his experience starting at Dylex and La Senza, plus the importance of key supplier relationships, finding great partners to grow the business, and the magic of focus. Next, Charles de Brabant, Executive Director of Bensadoun School of Retail Management at McGill University, joins me, and we explore his luxury retail experience in Asia with Loreal, and now 30 years on, standing up the retail program at McGill University. Finally, I'll take a look at the retail news of the week, but first, let's listen to my interview with Joel from iStore. Joel, welcome to the Voice of Retail. Thank you for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having me, Michael.
Well, we're here today, Retail Council of Canada's DTLC conference in Montreal. So I think your hometown, I believe.
Yes, absolutely.
So great to be back in the great city of Montreal, and thanks for taking the time to chat.
It's a pleasure.
Tell me a little bit about your background. You've got a rich history and a rich experience in retail, and tell me a bit about your journey and what you're doing today.
Sure. So, I grew up in a retail family, and one of my father's objectives when I was young was that I learn the business elsewhere, and then if I was actually able to add some value, then maybe they'd consider hiring me. So I kind of cut my teeth at various organizations, starting in apparel manufacturing. I was working in a warehouse packing boxes and putting plastic bags on dresses and skirts and blouses, and did that for a couple summers. And eventually I did an internship at Dylex in Toronto. This would have been 87. Dating myself a bit here, but they had just bought a 1,500 store, two chains in the U.S. called Brooks and Foxmore, and my summer job was to abstract 1,500 leases for them. And when I came in the first day, I saw my empty desk, and I said, "This is great, where's my computer?" And they said, "Computer? Ha! No, you're going to do it manually with pen and paper." So I brought my own computer in from home, my Mac, I might add, and I proceeded to computerize their real estate department, just because it made my job easier.
Sure.
And to make a long story short, I discovered that had real value within the industry. I then got moved around to various of the divisions within Dylex to help them computerize their real estate. And it was in 89 when Dylex decided to take the Club Monaco concept to the U.S. They were looking for an IT guy. They knew I had some IT skills, and so they packed me up and shipped me off to California, and I helped open the first 6 Club Monacos. So I was there for a couple of years, and by then it was time to sort of join the family business, and this was Susie Shear.
You passed the test. You were welcome back.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. And this was Susie Shear Limited at the time, was the public entity, but we had just started the La Senza concept in the early 90s and decided to take it internationally. So I went over to the UK in 94. I opened the first 43 La Senza stores there. And again, to make a long story short, discovered a master licensing for retail concept because we had been approached by a Middle Eastern group who wanted to open La Senza. And we thought it would be an interesting experiment to partner up with them and figure out a model for international expansion. And so that first partnership ended up being successful. I came back to Montreal to grow international.
Great way to scale the business, right? I mean,
amazing way to scale the business.
You become a global business and achieve scale pretty quickly, right?
Absolutely.
With the right partners.
With the right partners, and that way it's local capital being invested with local know-how and the ability to tweak the concept to fit, local tastes.
Sure.
And as long as you retain control of the important elements of your concept, the store design, the staff training, the merchandising, etc., it can be a great partnership. So I really embraced that model in the late 90s, starting with the Middle East, but ultimately we took La Senza into 43 countries over a 14-year period.
It was a great Canadian success story, really. Congratulations.
It was an exciting time, and we were, I guess, the beneficiaries of the fact that Victoria's Secret had not come to Canada, so we were able to become the leader in this market rather quickly in the first half of the 90s, and then a global leader in the second half and into the 2000s. So I did that for about 14 years, opened 500 and some odd stores in those countries. And that's when we sold the business to Limited Brands. I stayed on for a few years to help them with their international strategy around Victoria's Secret and Bath & Body Works. And
now they've subsequently, kind of off topic, they subsequently sold that business as well now to private equity.
They sold the La Senza business to private equity, just last year. And And
such changes in that category, right? That category's had a tremendous amount of change.
There have been. There have
years, not even decades, but in years.
Absolutely. And I think it's a reflection of the societal changes that have happened in terms of women's empowerment, in terms of how companies should or have been marketing to women.
Yeah. Body positive images and content and product. Right?
Absolutely. And diversity and changing tastes and styles. Some of the younger focused brands like Aerie and La Senza in some ways were the canaries in the coal mine on that. And,
sure.
and I think that's probably part of why L Brands chose to acquire us at the time. But it was I was still at L Brands, and I'm slowly segueing into how iStore came about.
No, it's fantastic.
But we at La Senza used to buy a lot of Apple equipment and computers from a local reseller who did B2B sales. And the owner of that business, Mike Batat, who's my partner to this day, approached me soon after Limited Brands had bought us, and he said, I'm looking to go into consumer retail. You're a retailer. You seem to know something about it. Maybe we should partner up. And, I sort of had a conflict of interest. I couldn't really be actively involved in another retail business. But I invested with him as a silent investor. Sure. For the first couple of years, he sort of got things up and running.
Very different category, of course.
Very different in theory, but in practice, it's all fashion, in my view. While La Senza may have been fashion apparel, tech is its own kind of fashion. The phone that you choose to have and the color that you buy it in, or the case that you put on it, or the headphones are all a personal choice designed to convey something, whether it's a status or a lack of status or a certain trend.
And I saw your black earbuds case. I'm like, that's interesting.
There you go.
So fast, I caught my eye right away.
Exactly. That's right. I'm often asked, why do you have black AirPods? I say, because everyone else has white ones. and it's a good example, you're right, of wanting to sort of carve out your own individual identity. Yeah. And so there's a lot in common in that sense. And what's, I think, equally interesting is that it was the differences between apparel and tech that were big eye-openers for me when we started La Senza. For example, on the topic of fashion, we became one of the first tech retailers, certainly the first that I know of, to put mirrors in the headphone section. To me, it was an obvious thing.
Right. What do you look like when you're wearing the headphones?
What do you look like when you're wearing the headphones? And that's a big decision point today.
Sure.
The number of people buying their audio product based on the sound quality is probably in the single-digit percentages. But what do they look like? How much do they cost? What's the brand?
And would you say that consumers think, well, look, they all sound good now?
Right.
They're pretty much, once a price point,
within a certain
they're all pretty good, right?
Absolutely.
I'm not a professional studio.
No, exactly.
After this price point, they're all going to be good.
Absolutely.
So then they start to make interesting style and design and brand statements too,
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. We even went so far as to put a fitting room, quote unquote, in some of our stores. We call it the sound booth, and it's literally a soundproof booth that you go inside and you can blast a speaker. Because again, we're asking you to spend $300, $400, $500 on a speaker from Bose or Beats. Yeah. You got to be able to try it. Can't try it on Amazon, so that should be an advantage of a physical store. Right. And so a fitting room for tech makes similar sense to a fitting room for fashion apparel. So we really saw a lot of similarities there. But what we stumbled into quite accidentally is the fact that there was nobody doing Apple in airports in Canada. In fact, there was nobody doing electronics in airports in Canada. The U.S. had its brands like InMotion and others, which you've all seen going through airports.
Brookfield, I guess, in some way. Or
yeah, exactly. Brookstone. They were recently bought by Hudson Group, so they're definitely a player.
Well, they've gone through a couple of iterations of their business.
Yeah, they went Chapter 11 twice, and so it's been an interesting journey for them. And
good luck to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And they have a very interesting model where they do predominantly private label goods. Yeah. So that works well for them from a margin perspective. In our case, we're selling Apple hardware, which, if you know anything about the hardware business, not a lot of margin in tech hardware. Where the margin is in accessories. Right. And so early on, we actually launched our own line of iStore branded accessories to really to build the brand and to improve the margin mix. But airports is an interesting place to operate as a retailer because the airports understand that retailers each have different margins, and so they will gear your rent deals to the category that you're in. So electronics retailers will pay a lower percentage rent than, say, an apparel retailer where they'll have substantial
So they'll take into account the margins of the categories, and they want your category in there. I shared with you before we started talking, I love your store because there's been half a dozen times where it saved my behind. I'm traveling somewhere, I'm like, I need something. I need an accessory, I need a cord, I need a plug, I need a new set of earbuds, whatever.
Sure.
So thank you for doing what you do, actually.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for being a customer. and so just circling back to the beginning, so my partner in 2008 had opened at Trudeau Airport. And we quickly got approached by various airports throughout North America saying, hey, we want an iStore too. It was in 2010 when I left Limited Brands and dove into iStore with both feet that I sat with Mike and I said, look, we have a tiger by the tail here. All these airports want us.
Yeah. And it's a bit of a renaissance as well in terms of airport retail, right?
Absolutely.
From over the past 20 years.
That's
for
right.
a variety of reasons.
It used to be, there was a mentality that airports would have these sort of made-for-airport retail concepts that didn't exist in the real world. They were only in airports. And so they were always just a little worse than any other retail.
A little quirky or a little worse.
That's right. And so in the last, I'd say, 10-ish years, particularly in the U.S. market, but yeah, I guess Canada as well, there's been a flight to quality and sorry, pardon the pun, but the airports the airports are now seeking what they call street brands, real retailers to come in. And so it was with a lot of that sort of spinning around in our heads that I said, maybe we should approach this differently and instead embrace the license model. And because, airports are so different, there are only about, today, maybe 4 major companies that control the vast majority of airport retail because they have organizations that are geared to that channel. So, for example, a store is open 6 a.m. till midnight, 7 days a week in probably many, if not most, airports. So that's about 120 trading hours. That's 2 to 3 times what a typical mall would have.
Right.
So staffing and scheduling is a huge challenge, particularly since an airport, by design, is located far from residential areas.
Right.
So staffing becomes a real issue. Security and controlling things like, for scissors. You need to open cartons in the back room of your store. You got to have a pair of scissors. How do you deal with that?
Sure.
So there's a lot of operational complexities to airports that have made it sort of a special expertise of these major groups. And so, long story short, we ended up licensing the concept.
So you took your learnings from La Senza, basically, and kind of started to apply them in this category.
Exactly. And so fast forward to today, we actually have 3 very distinct partnerships up and running with 3 of the major airport retail groups. And our primary partner is Paradis Lagardère, who's ultimately owned by the Lagardère Group in France. We have most of our stores with them. But we even have a couple of stores operated by InMotion, who's theoretically a direct competitor, but they will often have a situation where they already have a couple of stores in an airport. The airport wants variety, and so it gives them another alternative brand.
Right.
Because airport real estate is acquired through RFP. It's a very competitive process. And so these players will all bid, and they'll bid on packages. So an airport will say, right, I have 10 locations. I want a newsstand, a bookstore, a clothing store, an electronics store. And then these majors bid. So we'll join up with the majors and bid the RFPs. It could be a multi-year process.
Sure.
And so it's very different. But once you're in, you've got a guaranteed flow of traffic, a certain number of hours of the day, and so there's a model that can really work.
So let's talk about the stores themselves. So you've already touched on a couple of interesting things. You talked about some private label product, you talked about the brand product, and then you talked about an experience. Talk about that, what's the value proposition other than you're at the right place at the right time. So that's clearly a core component of the value proposition.
Sure.
But what else do you do there to make that kind of competitive and really sing?
Sure. So we always have to balance 2 sometimes conflicting objectives. One is we're in an airport where you get a wide variety of customers of ages and demographics, and they could be domestic, they could be international.
Yep.
And you're in a very small box, and so every peg on the wall, every shelf has to be highly productive. and you have to, in effect, offer all things to all people. And so that, on the one hand, is a necessary evil. I look at it as a necessary evil.
Sure.
Because on the other hand, you want to carve out a specific point of view and an identity and an approach to the category and try to find the commonalities of the two. So our vision for the category is very much fashion forward, very much female focused. We feel the female customer is very poorly served in tech and tech accessories. The category has generally spoken with a very nerdy, geeky voice. And is not as inclusive to allow for individuals with a wide variety of technical skill or knowledge to transact. And so our point of view was always we're the tech store for the rest of us, where consumers should feel comfortable asking questions, getting answered in simple language, packaging on product boxes that's not overtly technical. And at the end of the day, we're trying to find solutions and fill needs of our customers. And very much in line, I think, with Apple's brand values as well. Yeah. So all this to say that that former imperative of appealing to everybody can sometimes conflict with our desire to be for more fashion-forward or fashion-focused retailer. Probably the best expression of our concept is in the recently opened store in San Francisco Airport. We opened.
And how many locations are you in total?
So it changes up and down all the time because airports are always redeveloping. We're at 21 at the moment.
Great. And your first one was here in Montreal?
First one was in Montreal.
In the Trudeau Airport, right?
That's right. We've had as many as 10 in Canada. We're now down to 6 in Canada.
Ebb and flow of the business.
Ebb and flow of traffic. Well, and there's been a trend in the last 3 or 4 years where airports have come to realize that they're underserving their travelers with food and beverage. So they're repurposing a lot of space that was other retail into food and beverage.
That's true. I see that. Yeah, actually, now that you point that out, I do see that a lot more, like the kind of bespoke. They're trying to serve more than just your average thing.
Right.
So they're just trying to reconceptualize all the time, right? What are they serving and what are they not?
No, exactly. But it hasn't really been an issue for us because for some of the stores, a couple of the ones that have closed, were quite low volume. We had a very tiny store in Ottawa Airport, for example, and been replaced by stores like our 2,500 square foot flagship in San Francisco Airport, which you can imagine does orders of magnitude more volume.
I saw a picture. It's a beautiful store. It's the blue on the top. I mean, that's right. A real nice store.
Oh, you did?
Right?
Oh, thank you.
It's a really nice store.
Yeah, we're pretty proud. It's the largest tech store ever to open in an airport in North America. Wow. Maybe the world, but we haven't done the survey.
And in the heart of tech, right? If you think about it, who's traveling through that airport? Right?
Exactly. Although a little bit of pressure on us because it's Apple's doorstep.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of our value add with our partners is supporting them in executing the Apple standards, to 100%. Right. And that comes from a relationship that my partner has going back 25, almost 30 years with Apple. And the trust that has been built up, despite being a $1 trillion+ market value company, Apple still values relationships, and if you build trust, you'll be rewarded. And they know that when we choose a location or build a store, we're going to do it to the highest possible standard. When we train our staff,
trusted
merchandise,
retailer, trusted partner. Right?
Exactly.
So clearly, it's not the first time iStore is not the first time you stood up a business. You stood up many. So what are the kind of the key 3 lessons you've learned that you would say to your younger self, back in the day? Okay, now that I know it, what would I tell myself?
Right.
What would I tell my younger self about the journey I'm about to undertake?
Well, I think a few things that have proven true for me time and again in business, and so I guess I've embraced them fully by now. I guess one would be the importance of partnering. Not having this sort of hubris that you can somehow do everything well, especially in today's world where each element of retail and business in general has become very complex. And so, can you be a great marketing company and a great merchandising company and a great logistics company and a great IT company
and a great
all
people
under one roof?
Hiring and
exactly.
Real estate.
And so knowing what you're good at and focusing on that to the exclusion of those things that you're not necessarily going to be best of breed at, and then finding best of breed providers or partners or third parties. I think that's been a very important lesson, and our airport experience has certainly proven that out. Right. And so today we wouldn't have more than a few stores if we didn't have these partners who had the skills that we lack. Yep. So I'd say partnering would be one. I think the importance of constantly testing and experimenting. It's funny, we had Ron Johnson spoke here this morning, and he echoed this sentiment very much that when you can get into this analysis paralysis if you don't want to take a leap without having some certainty before making a decision. I think it's really important to have a culture which rewards and encourages experimentation and testing. And, 5 of 6 things you try might fail, but that one that succeeds makes the rest of it worth it. And so I think that importance of play within your business is crucial. And I guess the third one, which complements the other two somewhat, is the importance of focus. That's something I've learned from Apple, really, as well. How few products they focus on, and the importance of saying no to things that are going to take your eye off the ball or take you down a path that might, put other elements of your business at
Distractions
risk.
Are very attractive sometimes.
Absolutely.
Right? Let's go follow that because that looks like someone else is being successful. We should be a part of that.
That's right. And it's ironic. Sometimes it means really going against the grain. Give you an interesting example is I'm known to be quite technically inclined, and for example, I launched lasenza.com in 1999 as one of Canada's first transactional websites.
Right on.
So I've got some pretty deep experience in e-commerce, and yet have chosen to have virtually no e-commerce within the iStore business. And the reasoning being that it doesn't complement airport retail that well. I can't have much of an omni-channel strategy, for example. And number two is a lot of what we sell is commodity. So, the competing directly nose to nose with the Best Buys and Amazons and everybody else is probably a lot more pain than I'm ready to experience at this stage of my career.
But you can see how analysts, people in the industry, or observers will go, "Hey, you don't even have a website. What's wrong with you?"
Right.
Yeah. But sticking to that conviction, it's certainly not from a capability perspective.
Right. And the last thing I want is all my people worrying about an e-commerce site, and then neglecting stores. I recently had the pleasure of meeting the soon-to-be former CEO of WH Smith, Stephen Clark, in the UK, and they got 1,500 stores in 30 countries, and he talks about having built, he believes, the best analog business in his category, because they did the same thing. They went completely contrary to the market, and won as a result, because everybody else, was rushing toward
homogeneity or whatever. Everyone is rushing at the same point.
That's right. And I don't want to mislead. I'm not a Luddite by any stretch. I embrace digital.
Brought the computers to Dylex.
But it just didn't make. Yeah, exactly. 35 years ago, whenever that was. So this really, is specific to how iStore developed.
I think it's a very powerful statement on strategy, right?
Right.
Is understanding what the strategy is. You're right. When you think of it, there's not much competitive advantage here in airport. That nature of that business is what it is. There's not a lot of BOPUS. You're not going to go buy online and pick up in the airport. It is that opportunity to track that audience.
Sure. Now, having said that, we produce our own line of iStore branded products, as I mentioned. Today, it's about 80, 90 products. Those are distributed to third-party retailers. We're in about 1,000 Shoppers Drug Mart and Pharmaprix stores. We've been in Staples, Bureau and Grow. We're in a growing list of U.S. retailers. And those products are available online.
Sure.
That's how you want to sell them. But as a retailer, at the end of the day, you could buy an Apple product from any number of places, but in an airport, you can really only buy it from us. So we're happy to lean on that advantage to the max.
Well, Lisa, you've been so generous with your time. Thank you so much for sharing. It's a great story. It's a great story of Canadian retail that's kind of come and gone, and now established as a real success story. So, and again, thanks for saving my rear end more than once or twice in airports. So, again, a personal connection to you. So, thanks again for spending time with the Voice of Retail.
Pleasure, Michael. Thank you. You take care now. Bye-bye.
Charles, welcome to the Voice of Retail. Thanks for being here with me today. How are you?
Very well, Michael. Thank you for having me.
Well, we're here at the Retail Council of Canada's DTL event, right in the heart of the city where you are present. So let's start with a little bit about you, your background. You've got a rich background in business and luxury retail, and now you're an academic. So let's talk about...
I wouldn't say I'm an academic, but I'm involved in an academic adventure. Let's just put it that way. I'm a born and bred Montrealer and graduated from McGill in the early 80s and then left as soon as I graduated from the Bronfman building, where I'm back more than 30 years later.
Talk about full cycle. Circle,
totally
right?
Full circle and totally unexpected. I've been, I could say I've had a relatively full life and full experience. I've been relatively fortunate. I think you might say I'm a cat in terms of, I don't know how many lives it would have been, but it seems like I've had a few.
Right.
In a nutshell, a little bit of studying after McGill undergrad. So I went to Oxford and studied history, and then I worked in Africa for a couple of years for the UN. That led me to an MBA at Stanford. And then I guess that sort of, one thing that's sort of underpinned everything more or less that I've done is always a link to learning in business schools in some form and link to business.
Even in the private sector.
Even in the private sector. So I joined a sort of a mini monitor type company out of Paris with HEC professors. So half the partnership was professors and half the partnership were practitioners. Rose through the ranks and became one of the partners. And around 2000 decided that a number of things were happening personally that were not fun at the time. But so somebody approached me from Loreal and said, would you like to join our global learning team and be in charge of marketing and sales learning capabilities, which I said yes to, which was sort of absolutely crazy to hire somebody from the outside to, not so much on the sales side, because I wouldn't say L'Oreal is, P&G or those type of competitors are better on the sales side, but on the marketing side, I think there's few benchmarks in the world that would be as good in marketing as L'Oreal is.
And they like to grow from within too.
And they like to grow from within. So it was, I still to this day have no idea why they hired me, but for me it was a great experience.
Well, I think the Stanford MBA and the experience helped.
Yeah, but still, it's one thing to do Stanford MBA, it's another thing to do really good brand marketing, and I think that's something that L'Oreal excels in. Anyways, I was fortunate enough to join. I did use to leverage my capabilities of staying there, of globalizing a mini MBA program that they were doing with INSEAD Singapore, and NYU Stern School. So that was great, over and above the area that I was supposed to be focused on. And then they gave me a great opportunity to go to Shanghai. So I became the head of learning for L'Oreal in Asia. We had an entity in Singapore that we anticipated very early on that Northern Asia would become critically important to the development of business in general.
Right.
So by 2004, which was probably ahead of its time, we moved the thing up to Shanghai, and that was just an awesome 5 years with a lot of liberty, because strangely enough, L'Oreal's Asia headquarters were based in Paris, which might sound counterintuitive and say that they weren't in line with the times. But one thing I would just say on that is Asia was becoming a critically important part of the world to develop. Having the Asia zone in Paris, where all the products were being developed and the brands were being developed, but
you can see the logic of it.
It mean you had Asia in your face instead of having Asia 12 hours away by flight and 6 hours away by in terms of time difference. Anyways, and so because they were all in Paris and I ran an entity that had been functioning relatively well, I was like an entrepreneur with a lot of means and being able to develop a whole learning approach for especially managers in Asia. We had about 2,000 of them. So great moment of learning and doing things. And then they said, you got to come back to Paris. And I got caught by the Chinese bug. My wife was starting a Chinese contemporary art gallery at the time. So or art center, I should say. She doesn't like the word gallery, so I think I'm going to be more precise. She wouldn't like it. She heard me. And then I partnered up with probably the best headhunter in the luxury space and creative brands in the world, a woman called Floriane de Saint-Pierre, who's well known on the management side, but better known on the creative side. She recruited Christopher Bailey as a creative director of Burberry, probably was instrumental in Edith Slimane going to Saint Laurent. And so she's got a little bit of experience, and she became very close to Angela Ahrens. So she even did some work for Apple when Angela moved to Apple.
Right.
So I was very fortunate to start up her business in Asia, and at the same time do my own learning side of things. So I taught a luxury branding course at CIBS, which is arguably the best business school in mainland China, or certainly the best, at least in the FT rankings, top 10.
So in your experience in China, what one or two things surprised you? That You knew, obviously, you're getting into a very global position, and China was a very interesting place. But is there one or two things that stand out in your mind that surprised you about operating there?
I think probably a little bit less true then, but coming from a country like France, where when you ask somebody to do something, first thing that come out of their mouth is no. The Chinese were very happy to say yes. But let's do it this way. So I think it's a little bit like the Go game or the nature of flows. Having a no creates a barrier.
Right.
Whereas having a yes, even if you're going to go slightly to the right or slightly to the left, you might be able to re-deviate, or maybe by going to the right or to the left, you find out that actually it was better to go to the right or to the left.
So I've heard it said instead of yes, but, yes, and.
Yeah, and so there was this real notion of let's just try it. I mean, being able to create a luxury branding course at CIBS took 2 seconds of me talking to the head of the MBA program at CIBS and saying, I want to try and teach this course. And she said, why not? If it works, you just need to make sure that you have 20 people in the class. And I had 50 for 5 straight years. So that's a good example. Or my wife, she started in Chinese Contemporary Art Gallery, and within 5 years, within 2 or 3 years, she was, in French you would say incontournable, and she would be, one of the key people that you had to meet, not just in the art world, but more generally if you wanted to know things about Shanghai.
Right.
So that would be the first thing, and I think the other thing is we were really there. If you go back and you look at the 1930s and you think of the glory years of Shanghai, people say 1920s, 1930s. If you read about it, it was actually a very short period of time where it peaked, and that was around the mid-30s. And I would say the same thing. We were there from 2004 to 2014. I really think those were the years where, just to give an analogy, if you were to open an Italian restaurant in 2004, as long as you had, squared white and red napkins with a Chianti bottle and somebody that you had some Latin-speaking person that could be the waiter, and you sold one half decent pasta bowl, you could be successful. And then if you flash forward at 5 years later, if you weren't developing a new super cool Italian concept,
you didn't have a chance.
We didn't have a chance. And maybe another example of that, we left in 2015. WeChat was already installed as the sort of the Facebook of or the WhatsApp of
social media
of China. But it wasn't a payment platform yet. I don't even think they had started their payment platform. By 2017, they were already the largest payment platform in all of China. So 27% market share in terms of what all payments were done. So just this ability to just transform itself extremely quickly. So there's the yes and part of it, but there is also just how fast things transform.
So speaking of fast, you're back here in Montreal. Tell us about what you're doing here in Montreal.
So I moved to Malaysia right after that, and did a very operational head of HR role for one of the fastest growing retailers out there. I'm going to answer your question, but let's just say it was a family owned business, and Indians, and it was tough. We were growing extremely fast, and we were going to double the size of the company, going from 500 million to about $1 billion in sales. Fully family controlled, that becomes tension in terms of cash flow. I never really got in with the brothers. I suffered as a result. Personally, I got a recurrence of cancer. And at the end of that, I just said, and they weren't keen necessarily to renew the contract. Maybe it's time to change lives and readapt. Our kids were getting older. They were going to university. Our daughter, the last one, was off to university at the end of that year. And we just thought, well, this is a time where we can do something else. Montreal was not at all in our plans. My wife is from New York. Coming back to my hometown, my home turf, was really not in the cards. But I was fortunate enough through Henry Mintzberg
Great professor, great strategy professor.
Great strategy professor and career whisperer as far as I was concerned. Got me to meet Dean Isabelle Bajur in end of March, and she said, well, we don't really have anything for you now, but we might be doing something in retail. So in the back of my mind was 2-3 classes, and then I got this caustic email from a professor, who's Saibal Ray, who's now the academic director of the retail school, saying, are you moving back to Montreal and are you interested in retail? And I said, it really depends on what we're doing. So we talked on the 10th of May, and he said, in 5 days we're announcing a $25 million gift from Aldo Bensadoun to create the leading academic institution dedicated to the future of retail, and we're going to go more broadly than just fashion and marketing, which seems to be what had existed in the educational world. Got off the phone. And Skype call.
And where are you now?
And I was in Malaysia.
Still in Malaysia, okay.
And went to see my wife, and I described what I'd been offered, and she said, "This was tailor-made for you. You can't say no. I'll have to readapt. Won't be easy. She's still having problems today, but she said you just can't say no. So it was done within a blink of an eye, and." That was the 15th of, let's say I accepted on the 15th of May when the gift was announced, and arrived on August 1st, 2017 to start this incredible adventure of actually with the vision of being the leading academic institution in the world dedicated to the future of retail. And I really think that we have an opportunity, not only because of the fact that there isn't really anything out there from a competitive landscape, so you're not sort of sitting there going, you have to have a blue ocean strategy meeting and trying to figure out exactly where you can angle things. We really are unique even at this stage now. Obviously, other people may come up and compete against us and with bigger means, but this is where Aldo...
And there's other universities in Canada that do retail, Alberta, Ryerson...
Yeah, but nothing as a real full school with the scope of ambition. Not in Canada, not even Warden's Center of Retail Excellence is scoped as largely and as broadly as we are. So and so to be involved in that kind of an adventure, who gets the chance to create a school within a university as prestigious as McGill, and to be perfectly honest, coming home was so much better than I expected. I think it was really time. 15 years in Asia was at a pace that is, as you can imagine, tough.
Different, all those things, right?
Exciting. If I made an analogy to a drug, which would not be politically correct, it's like being a cocaine addict for 15 years. To have a better balanced life, and to be in Montreal at a time where you come from Toronto, you benefited from the downside of what happened in Montreal, and to suddenly see Montreal bounce back in a way that it has in 5 years, and I think on a totally different and quite unique positioning in the Canadian and North American landscape, and also in retail. I think it's consumption maybe in Toronto, but I do think that probably in terms of exciting retail concepts and related concepts, like in the ecosystem, Lightspeed or something like that.
It's great to see. I mean, I went to McGill, so and I'm from Ottawa originally, so I have a lot of experience in Montreal. So it's great to see the vibrancy here, and
it was so sad for so many years, so it's not just nice to...
Many years of less excitement, but now it seems that I wouldn't say a rebirth, but it's a renaissance, I think, of Montreal business, and the culture is always strong, but the business is really...
But I also think that the culture and the creativity is and this is where I would make a difference between creativity and innovation. The creativity, I put the Cirque du Soleil, the food and beverage industry, the culture, that whole piece is so important in Montreal, and allows us, I think, to create things that are slightly different to what you would traditionally find in other parts of the world, while being strong in certain technological areas like artificial intelligence. That's Toronto,
world leading.
With Toronto or Waterloo or whatever. So
fantastic. Well, listen, thanks so much. I'm going to have you back on. We're going to talk more about this, but let's. This is a great start to our conversation. Love to learn and continue to learn more about the school. So, last question: if people want to get in touch with you or want to learn more about the school, where do they go?
Well, they can go on our website. So I mean, it's a little bit complicated, but it's Bensadoun School of Retail Management.
All right. Well, we got Google for that, so I think
and then I won't even try and spell my name
I'll put it in the show
at
notes.
McGill.ca, but
Great.
it's Charles de Brabant at McGill.ca, or BRSM, I think, is our short at McGill.ca.
And I'll put that in the show notes in case people want to get a hold of you or find the site.
And happy to welcome you there too, Michael.
Great. Well, thanks for spending time with me. Well, thanks to Joel and Charles for being my guests in this episode. Now let's hit the highlights from Retail This Week e-newsletter. Put this newsletter together. Biggest circulation of any weekly in Canada each and every week. Curated look at the top retail news stories of the week. Kicks off this time, great article from Strategy Magazine looking at the wonderful work that Canadian Tire Marketing has been done. It's a feature article on Market of the Year, Susan O'Brien. She's been streamlining Canadian Tire branding, and boy, when you look at the Leger survey, 2019 Leger survey, which names Canadian Tire retailer the most admired brand in the country, jumping up from number 3, already quite solid in 2018, and beating out Google and Amazon. So if you're familiar, as we all, just such a big piece of the culture, and it's great to see that brand moving forward. And that was from Strategy Magazine. From Financial Post, is Black Friday the new Boxing Day? Well, I've done, and RCC did research again with Leger, and for sure, 43% of Canadians plan to shop on Black Friday, up from 40% last year, and more than plan to spend on Boxing Day. So Boxing Day is still an important holiday, but Black Friday for sure is starting to take precedent in terms of share of mind and the intent of spend. We'll see how it all shakes out and get an idea looking back and looking forward towards the end of the year. Aussie eyewear retailer Bailey Nelson continues rapid store expansion. This from Craig Patterson's Retail Insider. I think they're at 7 stores now. They want to be at 50 over the next 3, so they continue to grow. Great from Australia, great Australian eyewear maker, and it kind of plays in the whole Warby Parker space, but is being very successful. A couple of great videos. Walmart, this is a really, you should watch this one. It's Walmart CEO Doug McMillan. His quote that's making the rounds from this video: "We could go away at any minute." A little hard to imagine, but it's an interesting perspective to have as the CEO and basically wake up every morning and make sure that you don't go away. So it's a great video, long-form video, so do watch that. As well, there's also a video link to Aldo's CEO talking about how Canada's better shielded from the retail apocalypse. And then part of that, as you watch the video, another great video to watch, talks about how we didn't overbuild in the country. So, and of course, as you all know, if you're faithful listeners, I say there is no retail apocalypse. Metro had some great results, and a good article from Canadian Business, which you pick up from Newswire. About 100 Metro stores already have self-checkouts, and Eric LaFlèche talks about putting in more. And really, there's a whole bunch of reasons. One is you just can't find the people to staff these stores, and 2, customers like it. And 3, there is, of course, some cost savings to be had over the fullness of time. So anyway, a good article. It both reports on their perspective or his perspective around self-serve. Also, some great business results, double-digit growth year over year, so producing some final year-end results. Congratulations to Metro and Jean Coutu. Since we're in Quebec, Premier Legault not ruling out a Quebec Amazon to promote local retailers. So it's an interesting position. We have products, we have nationalistic clients who want to buy in Quebec, and of course, Quebec is the home of some great tech. I'm not sure they'd be positioning themselves well to out Amazon, but there's no question that the Amazon marketplace model does work for delivering, so to speak, for local, provincial, or whoever vendors to sell and get on a major platform. So we'll see how that evolves. Of course, Amazon announced they're opening up a warehouse in the province of Quebec, so great news there. That from the Globe and Mail. Let's see what else we got. Looking at retail around the world, there's a good article here, kind of a survey article from Forbes. 10 online brands that have opened the most stores. So there's now 1,700 brands operated by digitally native brands like Third Love, Warby Parker, Allbirds, and Way. That's the handbag and luggage. So it's interesting. It's good data. I think the last count I looked at, it was 800 or 900. Now there's 1,700 stores that, again, started digitally first. and that now have the physicality of our real stores. Speaking of real stores, Macy's, not good results coming out this week. Shares fall on a miss. This from CNBC. Retailer slashes outlook. Now they're blaming sales deceleration, steeper than anticipated, warmer fall, weaker spending international tourists, and weaker than anticipated performance in the lower tier malls. I was reading an article from Sucharita, who's been on, of course, the podcast before, and she talks about interesting that out of all the stores, about 100 of them make about 50% of the profit, and they have lots more stores than that. So it's just an interesting look at what department stores in major cities and their role. Kroger launches farms to grow its own produce on site. This is really interesting. This from Biz Journal. You should check that out. Kroger is working with in-farm. So talk about talking about both getting local and getting fresh and getting reducing your footprint, growing the produce in the store. It's these vertical controlled environment cases. Pretty interesting. So do check that out. Kohl's, another U.S. retailer here, shares tank on earnings miss, and they cut their 29 forecast. So not going so well for Kohl's. I mean, if you think of Kohl's, I always think of how they kind of launched as the Amazon. You can bring your Amazon returns to Kohl's. A bit of a what do they call it here? Retailer cast blame on an increasing competitive promotional environment and warmer weather. There's the warmer weather again at the start of the fall season. Women's business was weak during the quarter, performing all of their segments. So not really a whole lot of good news coming out of Kohl's or Macy's, unfortunately. We wish them luck in all that. What else we got? In independent business, a good article in the New York Times, how these niche stores surviving the retail apocalypse again. To reaffirm, I don't think there is a retail apocalypse, but it's a good overview article on small indie retailers and how you can survive and, in fact, thrive. Good news here coming from Ontario, and I think I mentioned it last week. A little bit of daylight in the Ontario cannabis, the retail cannabis file, where it looks like they're going to allow click and collect here. Looks like Premier Ford is saying they are indeed working towards their goal of open market. So there's lots of pressure to get those stores open for a whole bunch of very good reasons. Ontario well behind where they should be. And they really need to scrap that whole lottery system. It's just not working. It's just no need for it. Inventory is backing up. So let's hope that's all good news, and we get very good news in the weeks to come as we head into 2020. Speaking of governments ending some restrictions in Winnipeg or Manitoba, they've had restrictions on Sunday and holiday shopping hours. So it looks like they're reviewing that, and it's really only fair just to kind of look at how you can buy anything online anywhere at any time, yet the physical stores have some limitations. So good that they're taking a look at that. Speaking of Alberta, in terms of in cannabis, there's this good article from the Red Deer Advocate. The gasoline alley in that particular area has got now 6 retail cannabis stores, and they of course highlight Alberta as the cannabis retail leader nationwide. More than 200 stores approved in Calgary alone, though not all those stores have been opened yet, but 200 stores have been approved. What else we got? From Strategy Magazine, retail's role in creating confident cannabis shoppers, kind of a role of, so to speak, of cannabis articles. By 2025, 1 in 5 Canadians will be cannabis consumers, according to research from EY. So good article, kind of a survey article there from Strategy. Into the digital side, the other headline here, big news of the week, Loblaws expand e-commerce to act as a marketplace. So they're getting into the marketplace business, they being Loblaws. So lots of interesting things there. They certainly do have the traffic and certainly have the national footprint. So there's no reason why really to get into the marketplace game. What else? Walmart Canada unveils largest blockchain for supply chain. This is really interesting. They will have a distributed ledger tech to track deliveries, verify transactions, and automate payments among their Walmart Canada and its carriers. So that's really interesting, and that's apparently going to go live Feb 1, 2020. I'm sure we'll hear more about that. That from SDC Executive from Globe and Mail, artificial intelligence equipped carts are the latest. We talked about this at Sobeys. I haven't checked those out myself. I mean to make a pilgrimage and go check those out and take that for a test drive, so to speak. And London Drug in the news, the great London Drug led by Clint Mallman, and they are now doing in Metro Vancouver, and I think 10 or 20 other cities, they're going to be doing direct same-day delivery, e-commerce delivery, ready for Black Friday. So congratulations to them. That's standing up. That's a very good competitive place to be, but not easily done. We all know that the last mile is the tricky one, but really good for them. Good for London Drug to stand up a retail and e-commerce powerhouse. Well, that's a wrap on this episode of The Voice of Retail. If you like this podcast, you can subscribe on Apple iTunes, your favorite podcast platform. Please rate and review, and be sure and recommend to a friend or colleague in the retail industry. I'm Michael LeBlanc, founder and president of ME LeBlanc Company, Inc. You can learn more about me on www.meleblanc.co or, of course, on LinkedIn. Until next time, have a great week.